Hi everyone. So glad that you guys can join us for another episode here on the Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host today. My name is Ivan.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Jack.
I'm Kylan.
Today we'll be talking about the real estate market and its effect on today's society, especially for us high schoolers. And the real estate market, if you've been reading the news recently, well, not recently, a few months ago, it was going kind of crazy with like um, high inflation, these kind of stuff kind of like shook up the real estate industry, especially after like the the housing bubble pop. So people has been like kind of scared around real estate recently over the decade. So what are you guys' general opinion on the real estate market? Because my current opinion is probably like it's kind of overpriced, like it's not
Yeah.
unusual. Like seeing a
Yep.
house like going for like 3 million is not unusual anymore, and it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, I think it's because demand has increased so much just because like interest rates have been increasing since the pandemic. Um, because like I mean, although like even though interest rates have increased, like they're still low compared to when rates were like in 2018 and 2019. So that's kind of like that kind of explains why more people are able to afford a home. Um, I'm just looking at some statistics, like interest rates climbed to 4.17% recently. And across the 30 years, like it's still been steadily going down. So I think that's just why people have been able to afford more homes. And that's why demand is very high right now.
Yeah, I think so too. Like exactly what Kylan said about like interest rates. Especially like during the pandemic, like that time period, I know like the real estate market was like really, really hot. And like we're all in different areas in the United States, like, even Ivan and Kyvan, like you guys are in different, slightly different areas of California. And I think that's interesting because in my area, like, and just like all around the United States, I think most areas have been like really hot, like during COVID years. So that's kind of interesting to see like that nationwide trend.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. Like the rising inflation in like the economy in general has led to inflation in the consumer price index for the housing, which is like a rise in like price level. And I feel like currently, like with like the economy is like slated to go into a recession, and I feel like that's gonna be like that's gonna displace a lot of American like citizens into like a bad economic situation.
Yeah, like I know like a few years ago, like the mortgage rates were like extremely low. So basically anybody who wanted to buy a house could take out a loan and pay for the house while not paying that much more money. But like now the mortgage rate has been skyrocketing, right? So I guess that can then decrease the housing demand a little bit. But here in the Bay Area, I know Kyle and I can kind of like agree on this, but like the housing fever hasn't really gone down. Um, a bunch of people are like um I don't know, my parents always wanted to like move to this area because there's better schools, whatever. But it's the housing market. Like a lot of people are looking to buy second houses, third houses, and then like couple $1 million is like absolutely crazy. But I don't know about like anything about the East Coast, anything there.
I
Yeah, no, that's pretty standard, but I will say I think like currently, I think the market has cooled down a little bit over here. Like it's not back down to like pre-COVID levels, but it's definitely not as hot as it was like during its peak, which is like kind of interesting. And like, but the trend of like still looking for second homes or like third homes or like investment properties is still very like prevalent. It's just like the prices of individual houses aren't as high as they probably would have been not a couple years ago, like last year or around that time.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a similar trend here in Illinois. I found a statistic that said like the average Illinois house price has gone up by 9.3% over the past year, which is a lot. and like that could definitely, I mean, like it has cooled down a little bit because like inflation in general has like kind of like slowed down, but it's still very high, and like for some people it's still unattainable.
Yeah, like I know like in large cities, whatever, like
Mm,
the problems are really big, right? And then like in New York, like what do you call them? Like the tiny apartments with like one room, and then they're like
yeah,
their rent is super high.
Oh yeah.
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 And I think, and then like in the middle of nowhere, you can buy like a 6,000 square feet mansion for like $5,000. And then like
Yeah.
it's just like supply and demand, but but like I watched a video like a couple weeks ago about like about the billionaires bro in New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the super skinny skyscrapers that like they super skinny, they like bought land and then converted it into air real estate, and then so they can build up, and then like
Yeah.
it's like luxurious apartments,
Yep.
super
It's like
expensive.
right near Central Park, right? Like
Yeah, it's
that
like
area.
Yeah.
it's next to Central Park. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went there like during October, but like it was like
Mm,
super surreal, right? And then um but the crazy thing is that nobody lives in those skyscrapers. It's because the people who buy these apartments use them for real estate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like what like now real estate isn't for like, oh, I want to have a roof over my head. It's more like I want to have an investment to keep my money safe.
mhm.
So what are you guys' opinions on this?
I mean, I think like it's interesting, like Billionaires Row, because it's such a famous example. Like people replicate what they're doing all over the country, like having homes and like keeping it there literally empty just for like that price to rise. And like it's interesting, but because it's so like famous and like because it's so expensive, there's like so much more attention on it. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like I think it would kind of make more sense if they like lived in them or like did something else besides keep them empty. But like I would have said like it makes sense to like rent them out, but at the same time, because they're so high priced, like who it's like much harder to find that market versus like an $80,000 house you're like renting out. It's a little bit easier to do that. So like it kind of makes sense. And like I'm sure that having real estate like this like kind of has tax um purposes. So like I'm sure what they're doing like does make sense to a certain
Yeah.
extent on their part.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them, for me, like I know like a lot of like housing apartment like districts are being built in my area, and I'm pretty sure it's like one like a landowner that's like building these up and like lending them out to residents. And I feel like it could be a profitable business strategy. I feel like it depends on where you live. And like I think the demand for like apartments in my area is like high because I live close to a pretty good school. But like in downtown New York, just like what's been discussed, like I feel like since the price is like so high there, demand is like super low, and actually it might be a detriment.
Yeah,
So
I just
yeah.
think, yeah, I think location is just like so important, for in terms of home value and like the demand for something because your house in terms of like where it is in connection like what's surrounding it, it basically it's the difference between if people want the house or not. So I just think like location, I don't know, that's like maybe 80% of the value. Because like you said, like downtowns vs somewhere in the middle of nowhere, um maybe the house is bigger, but still if you're in New York, that once that apartment building is still going to cost you more just because of the convenience or like the demand of apartments in New York.
Yeah, no, like even in New York, I think like where you are in New York City depends. And like it really affects the prices, like Upper East Side, like Upper West Side, and then like those different areas. It like there's just like a different surrounding, different environment, and like just like differences. And like to give a more broad example, like New York compared to like middle of Wyoming. I'm sure Wyoming is really nice, but like having a big house and like a ranch, like it's not going to be super, super expensive versus like even a townhouse in like the Upper East Side in New York is going to be like a lot. So like that's location's really important, I think.
Yeah,
And
like I know
yeah.
like Jackie talked about like tax purposes, like Trump's recent tax thing came out and it's a really big deal. And then, like what I from what I had read is he could get away with not paying this much taxes was saying that he lost a lot of money on his real estate, right? So real estate now is more like a tool to pay less money, save more money instead of like doing its actual job, which is to live in.
Yeah.
But like talking about like overpriced housing, whatever, there's just been recent, drama about like affordable housing crisis. And from like a definition provided by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, so that's just a legit definition. It's basically housing in which that the person living in it is paying no more than 30% of their gross income for housing costs, including utilities. So if we think about this, 30%, let's say you're a minimum wage worker, so your annual salary is around like $40,000. I'm being generous. Like it's probably
Mhm.
lower, but $40,000 yearly income, 30% of that is like super tiny as compared to the housing costs we see today, right? So that's why we have such a big housing problem, especially in the United States. I know in other countries they also face the same problem, but not to the extent we're facing in the United States today.
Yeah, I think like that's like the calculations about like minimum wage and calculating 30% by that. Like minimum wage obviously like it differs by state, but like the differences aren't that big. Like you might be in New York versus like Arkansas and you have like differences, but it's not going to be like $20 gap. It's relatively similar. And like I think if you're living in like a more suburban area, you might be able to get away with like living minimum wage and like being able to afford your rent under the conditions Ivan just mentioned. But if you're like in New York, because you're not gonna get rent for like $1,000 unless you're like having roommates, you're not living in that good of an area. Like it's just really hard to find rent or anywhere to live like that. And also I think like we're just considering rent here too. Like a lot of people want to own their own houses and like economically that might be better in the long run, but it's so hard because like the houses aren't affordable anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
I
feel
just
like.
thought.
Oh,
Go
you
ahead.
can go. You can go.
Okay. Yeah, and I just feel like with houses like being so expensive nowadays, I think it's interesting because like I know we say like demand is high, but looking at statistics, I think existing home sales fell um for the 10th month in a row in November 2022, with all regions of the US recording month over month and year over year declines in home sales. And you think that could be why like people like houses are getting like very, very expensive. So I just thought that was interesting.
I just feel like the current trend of like affordable housing, I feel like since the price has gone up like so much, I just don't think the current affordable housing is like sustainable. I feel like there should be like other things that could like be given to like people of like lower income to like help them gain affordable housing, because if you don't have affordable housing, that might like, I mean, like you might be like unemployed and stuff, and like and you want housing but you can't get it, and that's obviously a really really bad situation.
Yeah, and then like in that case, you probably would want to like get like rent instead of buy, right? And to save money or like you can't afford buying a house. But like that also um has its own set of problems, right? Rent prices are also going crazy, especially in places without rent control. I forgot the name. What is it called? Anyways, but like as long as I get my point across, it's fine, right? So like without like the rent price control, like rents can get out of control. And then like many investment companies are buying out houses, and they know like if they control the supply, they can also control the demand, right? So they buy out all the houses, keep it empty. They're willing to take a loss, but the people who are living in those houses that they haven't kept empty, they're paying extremely high prices, and they can offset the loss they're incurring by keeping some houses empty. But that's just like how many companies can keep rent or housing prices so high.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like kind of interesting to consider like as teenagers, because even though we might not be, it might not immediately affect us right now, but like in a couple years after college, or like if you don't plan to go to college, in just a couple of years, like you do need to find where you're gonna live. Like you could live with your parents, but that's not like a forever solution. And like I feel like I always see this argument online about like older people being like, you guys don't own your own homes, like that's not like, why are you doing that? And then like when you consider how expensive houses are, like it kind of does make more sense that um people our age or like slightly older than us aren't owning as many homes as the older generations are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I want to
uh
add like something because like obviously I feel like generally the population is going to like increase over time, which means like there's going to be like more people like demanding for houses like in the future. So like of yeah, I just wanted to like note that like over time like demand's probably going to increase because the pop I mean more people are like going to like be graduating from like schools and then looking for like jobs, looking for like a apartment or a house to like kick like kickstart like career and like life, like in independent life.
yeah, and then like online I've definitely seen tons and tons of like sources saying like millennials can't buy houses, they have to rent, and then especially like you have to live in a city, right? It's not like um in the 1960s they're like the suburban sprawl, like, and then like people are like going moving out of the city, but like now it's not that feasible anymore, right? It's like you have to buy a car, which many people can't, right? And then many jobs are located within the city, right? So people are usually kind of like forced to buy houses or rent closer to the city so they can commute for work. So
I mean, could they use public transit?
yeah, public transit definitely, but over here, in the Bay Area, I haven't really used public transit before. I only used the VTA, like the light rail, like kind of not that many times. I don't like, maybe Kyle can share a lot more about that, but it's not that great. I mean, it's usable, but it's not great.
Yeah, it isn't great.
How about you guys? Though? I know Chicago has a really good public transit system, but no, I don't know about um.
Yeah, okay, yeah, in Chicago, like I live like in the suburbs. It's like further from the CTA subway that like kind of operates there. But like some of my I personally haven't used Metro that much, but some of my friends have used Metro to commute to the city. I, I'd like to know what it is like in the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean like here because I'm in the DMV, I can't really speak for like Massachusetts, like other East Coast areas, but like the DMV itself, I think is like very connected. If you want to go to DC, like public transport is like the metro is like really big. I mean, I personally, if I need to go to DC, usually I just like by car, but like a lot of people use the metro and like the public transport. I don't know about buses, but I'm pretty sure there are buses, but metro to get from like where I am in Maryland to DC is like really popular. And I think it's like a lot of people like commuters, for example, before COVID, like this, like now there's like things about like, oh, I don't know if that's hygienic or things like that. But like before COVID, a lot of commuters who worked in DC prefer to take the metro because like traffic is really bad to like drive into DC. So they're like, you know what, let me just take transport.
Yeah, like I've used like when I went to East Coast for tourist activities. um, I use the metro in New York City and DC, and I can say like it's extremely sophisticated. And, like you can get anywhere really quickly if it's not in rush hour, but
Oh
um
my
yeah,
God.
there's like a
Yeah.
ton of people, but like it's pretty usable as compared to here in the Bay Area. Like in the Bay Area, they wanted to build a BART. Like since my parents came and lived in the Bay Area, they've said like they've already made plans to making a BART and they still haven't finished. And that was like 20 years ago.
Make a what?
A BART system, like
Bay
a
Area
train.
Transit.
Yeah, and then like they wanted
Oh.
Yeah.
to connect to San Francisco, and then it's still not finished. I
That's
can't wait for probably add a little bit more, but it's extremely irritating how
Mhm.
slow these plans are actually made into reality.
It's like
yeah.
my dad used to have like a job in the city, so it's just like you had to transit and then you had to go use the, I think it was the Caltrain as well, and it's the whole system is just not like, it's not very good, it's not very set up, so it's like it's hard. It's like transit, especially in the Bay Area, it's still like it's very far from what it could be like in like New York or big cities, you know.
Yeah, but like the BART actually I think completed, but the BART station near my house has I think is still under construction, but it's close to finish. That's good though. But like also like talking about trains, um in like many Asian countries like Japan and China, they
Oh
have
yeah.
like the high speed rail system, which is I rode on it once and I can say it's really cool. And then like you can transit between two large cities within 30 minutes. And then it's super cool, but like the US definitely could improve on this aspect. Definitely like maybe I want to live here in San Jose, but maybe I have a job in San Francisco, or I want to go to LA quickly without driving 5 hours. Like high speed rail systems will definitely help, but it's definitely not going to be a reality anytime soon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely. I feel like on the East Coast, I know Amtrak is like operating some sort of fast like system around like from like the DMV area to Philly and then to New York, maybe into Boston. I'm not completely sure, but it's like if you like live like on like the East Coast and you have access to the system, it's like really nice and like you can get around pretty easily. You can get to your job and you don't have to worry about like a lot of like other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, recently I just took like a train, Amtrak to New York, and it was like really easy and like um it was like in my opinion, a lot better than like riding a metro. I mean, obviously you pay a lot more, but like it was a really nice experience. It was different. Um, it was interesting, and I think like I don't know, for talking about real estate, do you guys think like having that public transport factors into like costs for real estate, or do you think other
Well,
factors like a
Yeah,
good
I
educational
Yeah.
system,
think
like do you
definitely because I think if you can like walk, if you're able to walk to like nearby places, just like the convenience of being close to other things, being close to schools, that's definitely like easy transportation is one of the major things that people go for in home buying. I think it's just like easy commutes to work and different time, because it's all about saving time, and it's like it's so much less of a hassle if you just downtown, you're so much closer to other things. That's why like those places are so much more expensive than other places.
yeah, I'm definitely jealous about how the East Coast is so connected as compared to here. But like here, people are generally buying houses. The demand for houses close to schools, close to work are really expensive, right? And then you have like large companies, like since we're like the heart of tech, like wherever Apple is located, wherever Google is located, there's really big traffic. People don't want to go through this traffic. They want to live closer. So the housing prices skyrocket. But if we have like a metro, for example, I don't know how feasible here is in Bay Area since we have many earthquakes. But like if we have like a feasible public transportation, which a public transport system where people feel safe, where it's useful, right? Um, then I can see housing demand go down, and people willing to, live a little bit further for their jobs because it's about how easy, to get there in time.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay, so in Chicago, I feel like both education and transportation play equally important role, I'd say. And that's why I feel like generally what I've seen is that actually in the suburban area, like prices, the real estate prices have been like rising at like similar to like in downtown. But I feel like in Chicago area, at least schools in the suburbs are like way better than some of the schools in downtown. uh like public schools, why there's definitely some good private schools in downtown that like I feel like people in the Chicago area, like CPS, like the Chicago school system has been a little bit questionable over the past few years, so they're just like moving out of it into a stronger and more properly managed school district that also like has like good access to transportation. And I know our metro's train system is very strong, and there's like a lot of different lines scattered all around the Chicago suburbs that lead into the city, that lead into the Union Station, and it's very accessible. So I actually see that some people are moving out of the city.
That's interesting. Because like you brought up how like education and like transportation are equally important in Chicago. But like where I live, like obviously proximity to DC will always be like really important. But if we're talking about like education and transportation, I find it kind of interesting how like where I am in Maryland, in like my specific county, I think like a lot of the transportation systems and like education are like really connected. Like the closer you in general, the closer you are to DC, like the more developed you're gonna be and like the better schools are gonna be there. And the more like the more expensive houses are also closer to DC, which is kind of interesting. So I guess like those two concepts are really intertwined. And then like to talk about education, because I mean I don't live in like a really big city, so like can't
I
really
feel like
relate to like being in downtown versus not downtown. But I think education is like literally number one factor. Um, here like obviously private schools like but they exist anywhere and also like the places this is also interesting I think the places with better public schools are also the places where all of like the good private schools are located. So like that's kind of interesting, and like if you have a good school then your housing value is going to be so much higher. Like even in my county, which is like not that big, but like if you have a good public school from where you are, your house value is going to be so much more expensive than like just I don't know 3 miles down where you go to a different school that's not as good.
Yeah, I
So
can definitely see a similar trend in our area. I feel like actually a lot of the housing costs like around like Chicago, uh, most of them are like increasing like around like the Chicago suburb. I'd say around the Naperville area because we have a lot of strong schools in the Naperville area, and also around the Evanston and Lincolnshire areas because actually our state number one school is actually in that area, and so is another like rich school in that area. So like definitely, I think what I said earlier was that education and like transportation are like equal, but now I'm like starting to doubt myself.
Yeah, and then like talking about the housing problem, like facing the current generation right now, like people can't buy houses. Do you guys think that this problem will pass down to us when we need to buy houses, or do you think there will be more opportunities for us?
well, considering like we are already like 16-ish, um, or like 17, 18, 15, around that, like it seems really far away, but it's kind of not. It's like less than a decade, a little bit more than a decade, or like around that. So I think like we probably will experience um like expensive houses because it's not just like a 1 day trend that started from COVID. It's been like a continuing thing, and I just can't see it stopping within the next 10 years. So probably, I think.
Yeah, I think like back to like education, I think it's just like the school districts, that also plays a large factor in like location, like in house pricing. Because um I personally I live close to like a lot of like to elementary school I think like in different houses, like if the school district to which your house like like there's like different cutoff locations for your house and like your district. So if your house is like one school has a bad reputation via a better school, that's the difference between like a couple $100,000. So I just think, yeah, school district and education, that's large factors in terms of like real estate market and pricing as well.
Yeah, and I feel like once we like graduate from college, because like most of the colleges are located in areas that have pretty most of the like top colleges are located in areas that have pretty good schools around it. So if we want to like live in those areas or we want to like live into the cities, obviously big cities and maybe a little bit medium-sized cities, they obviously are gonna have like pretty good schools with pretty good programs. So I definitely see I hope that the problem will be a little bit mitigated when when we like face it, but I feel like that's just wishful thinking, and I feel like we're definitely gonna have to struggle with that.
Yeah, and then like talking about like us buying housing, but it's definitely hopeful thinking that it will solve itself by the time we need to buy houses. But it's like what kind of places are you guys thinking that probably we should probably look into buying or renting that you envision yourself in the future?
Like, where do we want to live?
Yeah, like what type, suburban or urban? And then like
I think it's different like right out of college. I think urban, you're just like you're starting you're getting, depending on your job of course, but I think for me, I want to if I want to go into finance, I just want preferably in New York, just like right in the city, easy location, easy access to everything. I don't need a car. It save expenses, just like the convenience of your location, like right out of college. I think that's very important.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
me
want to.
too. Like, Kyvan, like you mentioned New York twinsies, but I think like New York is like so attractive because like it kind of has already that reputation and like it's very convenient and it's like downtown. So I don't know. I'm not like really that familiar with California and like the way Bay Area or like LA, Soho works, but um I just think like I don't know, it's like a little bit different than New York and how it runs. I don't know, like for LA and like the big cities in California, is it like very comparable to New York or is it like still kind of different?
well, I for LA been only been there like once or twice, but I would say New York is a bit more organized from my experience,
Organized.
but like in LA,
For
the
sure.
public transport system definitely needs some work.
I
But here in
think
the
that
Bay Area, it's just suburbs.
I just think public transit in California and like on the West Coast needs work.
Well, I haven't really used it, so I can't really speak for it. But from what like nobody really uses these public transport systems.
I haven't used much of public transit, but I can definitely say in like the West Coast, I definitely feel that it is a lot weaker than it is in the East Coast.
Like when you go to New York, I know you definitely have to use a metro, right? But when you go
When
to
you go to where?
LA, like New York City,
Oh yeah.
like you definitely will use the metro. But you go to LA, you're like, maybe I should rent a car, you know?
Ah, I
um,
mean, I mean, like if you want to really avoid traffic, maybe you want to take the like, public transit, right? Because like in rush hour, like in big cities, like traffic is gonna be like atrocious.
yes,
I
definitely.
remember
I think,
visiting LA like a few years ago. It was during rush hour. It took 3 hours to like drive like 20 miles. It was
Oh
crazy.
my
yeah,
gosh.
isn't New York like worse though?
Yeah. But I think like the difference is in New York is like I don't know, like how big is LA and how big is New York City? Like if you're living in New York and you're working in New York, then I'd assume you'd have like preset factors that like your workplace and your living place aren't like opposite ends of the city and like you'd factor that into your decision. So I mean, maybe public transport is like a pretty big thing because in New York, I feel like it's easy to walk to where you want to go. Is that like true in LA?
Well, I mean, we live in NorCal. SoCal is a bit of difference, a bit of a, a bit of a distance, but LA is pretty walkable if you don't walk in the shady parts. How about you, Kaiwin?
Yeah, I think a few times I've been to LA, it's like I just remember it. Yeah, it's definitely like once you get to like the downtown area, everything is pretty close together. But I haven't actually been to New York, but I'd imagine New York, I think it's probably even more centralized.
Yeah, New York is definitely. I think it's because I went to New York sooner than LA, but from my experience, New York is definitely really well organized. And
Yeah.
like people just don't care about who you are when you're walking.
I mean, there's just like
Yeah.
so many people.
Yeah, you say nobody cares anymore. Like just mind your own business and you're fine.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But
you kind of have to mind your own business in New York. Like if you don't, you are in some trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, but like I think like today's discussion is pretty interesting. So from what I want to take away is that housing in the US could probably be mitigated by, you know, helping not making sure that housing is for putting a roof over someone's head, not for like rich people wanting to save their money when they already like have millions of dollars, right?
Yeah, and another takeaway from today, I feel like, is that like education, like, and transportation both like play a huge role in how much like housing in the area will cost, and like also like just general accessibility with like key like I guess industries will definitely contribute to the cost as well. And so like as a result, like it really like depends on like the location. It's not just about like I mean we mostly do see this with cities, but also like could be like somewhere else where like the housing market trends have been especially prevalent.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting how like today we mentioned like future trends in the housing market and like when we become of the age to like buy a house or like rent out a house. And like it's probably wishful thinking to be like, oh yeah, it's gonna come down, we're gonna all be able to afford it. And but like that's probably not gonna be true because this trend isn't just like really recent. It's like been happening since the past couple decades. So yeah. It's interesting to think about like that for our future.
Yeah, definitely. I just think overall it's just like considering down the line when we were buying our own houses, like what type of location, and like how convenience, like how this matters and shapes into the real estate market and like how much these houses cost. We had a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in today as we talk about the real estate market and how it impacts us, our lives as high schoolers. And we hope that year has started well. And we'll see you guys next week as we continue our journey on the Teens for Business podcast.